actually in what they call Manhattan Center, but it's a New Yorker hotel.
Oh,
We have studios there, and we have we have the 12th floor. We have studios, 2 floors below, and then 12th floor as well.
He's a seasoned pro. Do I need to turn anything on here? Or
like number 3.
oh. Got it on already?
Yes, she does.
It's on, it's on, everybody's on.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. If you want, I can. I'll go ahead. It's okay. I'm the least interesting here, so
Well, I don't
it doesn't matter if they
sell
hear me or
yourself
not.
short. I should probably keep my.
The old trick. Right there.
So now is this an area you've been to before or not?
So I was here when my father received this award in 1999, and you did a. I kind of when he
Right.
received the award, I had.
And I'll see if I have a.
Oh, I say.
I was
Okay.
out country or
Right.
state or something.
We
because
good?
I usually make it go back.
Did it really?
I thought it was my. Earlier,
Okay, well, we're just going to do this. I'll have to turn a little further.
Back and look at it. Oh my gosh, it's 1999.
All right.
Seems like
We'll run it this way.
Oh, yeah.
We'll run it this way. All right. Thank you.
But
All right. Okay.
My fans are saying, okay, wow.
right.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, as we say, it's time. Too late to turn back now, right? Ready? All right. Well, welcome to a discussion this afternoon at the Al Neuharth Media Center. I'm Gene Policinski, Chief Operating Officer of the Newseum Institute, and we're going to be talking about a subject that I think is certainly in the headlines today, but which is really tied very strongly to what is the lifeblood of the nation, and that is something also that we see with the sign over here on the First Amendment, which is the marketplace of ideas. And the founders protected political speech most strongly because they felt it was one of the great necessities of a republic, of a democratic republic, to have the ability to talk about politics freely and to receive reports about it through a free and unfettered media. And that's where we're going to focus today. Our fellow panelists here, if I may start on the far end, John M. Singenthal, our anchor for the primetime news program on Al Jazeera America Network, and also the recipient, as you know, of the 2015 Al Neuharth Award for Excellence in Media. We have Tim Shorn, who's Associate Professor of Political Science, serves as the Director of the International Studies Program, and Mary Jo Hutzler, who is the Vice President of Content for Foreign Communications. And what we're going to talk about today is a topic that I think is more and more in discussion, and that is whether the news media helps or hurts the political process and helps the decision making. And I'm going to pose a question to each of our panel members, but very quickly I'd like to go to your questions if we can. And we have a microphone in the middle so that you can be heard not only in this room but on the telecast that we're doing. So if we could, when you spirit moves you, and hopefully it will move you quickly to come to the microphone and ask a question, we'll go to those as quickly as possible. So thank you for that. And John, let me start with you, and that is that
That's a loaded question.
It is, yes, and intentionally so. But we see more reporting on television earlier in terms of the presidential race than I can ever recall. And I go back to somewhere around President Polk. You know, what is that doing to the process? And again, the positives, is it helping or hurting? You know, some people would argue more information, that's great. Others would say, wow, it's not helping at all.
I don't know. I mean, some people maybe they're already sick of it. There's so much coverage so early now. It's hard for me to believe, but it seems like every election cycle we start sooner talking about who is going to be the next president of the United States. It's almost to, 2 years after somebody is elected, you're already well into who might be the presidential candidate. I don't know how you stop it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you stop people from talking about it. I wouldn't want to stop people from talking about it. But my only worry is that by talking about it so soon and talking about it so early, that you turn people off to the process. I mean, that's one part of it. The other part of it is, let me ask it in another way. Is the way that we cover stories nowadays on politics, does it serve the public's need to know about what the candidates' plans are, what the issues, does it serve to illuminate the important issues in the campaign and the important issues for the American public? I'm concerned that I don't want to make a speech, but I'm concerned that, I'm going to do that later.
6 o'clock tonight.
But I am concerned that that in general the media is not doing a great job of that.
You know, Mary Jo, we talked about how to divide this subject matter up a touch, and the presidential race is one thing, but local, regional, state, regional elections are another thing. In some ways, they're more immediate to people. You know, you get your garbage picked up as a result of who gets elected mayor. I mean, it's great to talk about the global issues, but it really is the stuff of life, is these local regionals. The question really, in a way, is almost the reverse that I posed to John. Given the changes in the industry, is there enough media covering politics to judge whether it's good or bad?
Yeah. You know, there's a lot less than there used to be from the regional, local standpoint, talking about politics. So, you know, we dedicate less space to it all the time. News holes are shrinking. I mean, that's part of it, but there's a fragmentation of media, and I think from the local, regional perspective, there's probably not enough of it in a sense compared to the past, but at the same time, I think those newspapers and outlets don't see that as their bread and butter, because there's other avenues for getting that news on TV and other places where the local newspaper isn't for at least on the national side, the experts.
Were there reporters to cover it in the past, and they're not reporters now? Why was there more coverage
on a national level?
Yeah.
I think
no, I mean on a regional level.
Well, I think there's still coverage. I think news holes, there's not as much space in the newspapers anymore for the news, and so decisions have to be made about what's the most important thing today. And sometimes a new restaurant opening might, you know, trump, no pun intended, what's going on over there, because it's deemed to have a higher relevancy value to the readers.
Well, Tim, there was a study that just came out. It's an international study of media covering politics, but it was an interesting, again, sort of twist on the questions, which was that at one point it was the voter and the politician concerned about the media. And that dynamic now is broken out, that the media no longer necessarily gets in that middle zone or is the place where both groups are looking, that it's a dynamic now of the outreach through new media or other ways of doing it. Whether it started with John McCain, who was probably the first real email kind of electronic candidate on a national basis, or as we've seen Twitter and all the rest, and then Trump now literally speaking in 140 character text plans. What's the dynamic in the media idea here?
Well, I think internationally we're looking at a real democratization, if you will, of media. That it's no longer, and I think that it's even reflected to some extent within the program at USD, that it's not just journalism anymore, it's also media, and media is going to come in different forms. And part of the reason for that is a need for people to be able to tell their story, their side. In so many countries that I look at, that I visit, the journalists are controlled by the state. So you have to look for alternative forms of media in order to get your story out. And we saw that through the course of the Arab Spring.
John,
can I just go, before you ask the question, I just want to go back to what you're talking about, local media. I think the other thing that's interesting about what's going on is there's a focus on sort of ultra-local or local communities. I live in a small community in Connecticut, and it's about an hour from New York. But local newspapers there are very, very popular. And what used to not get so much coverage in the last several years, seems we are covering the first selectman, the selectman race. We're covering the school board race in depth. We're covering the police commission. And I guess it depends on which media organization is in your community and whether or not you're the beneficiary of that. But some of those small papers are thriving and flourishing, both online and in print.
They are. It's that hyper-local mentality that they've adopted, and that's true. Sometimes that does play out still in covering the local races because that's very relevant to the people there. What gets pushed out for some of that is the national, is the international, because it is hyper-local so often, because you're just trying to serve those readers and those people right there, recognizing that they have a million other places that they can go for.
They want to know what's going on in their schools. They want to know there's crime in their community.
But one of the difficulties in that scenario, the hyper-local, is that you had, in most newspapers at one point, and in television to some degree, you had the person who would remember 4 elections ago or 5 elections ago. You had a certain perspective. When a candidate would say, we're going to build a bridge here, there was a tagline in the TV report or in the newspaper that said, well, 4 years ago somebody else said that, and 8 years ago somebody else said that. Today, while there's coverage, when you read the body of it, I worry that there is a lack of that perspective because we've lost so many people. And in television, the trend is to the soundbite. I mean, CNN survived my initial attempts at trying to work in television, where it was a 2-minute report on a gubernatorial race. I mean, that would be essentially considered a news special now in 2 minutes, I think. Except, of course, I would say on Al Jazeera America. That's right. And Al Jazeera America, which prides itself on long form, what I would call long form reporting. But television typically now it's 15 seconds. I remember hearing a WTOP radio reporter talk about doing the State of the Union or State of the Budget, the national budget in 7.5 seconds. Which was, we have one, it's going to total this much, now on to traffic. That was kind of the thrust. But the quality of and the nature of that reporting, talk for a minute about, from each of your perspectives, what are we seeing now? Because that's obviously good or bad for the political process. Didn't we start with?
Well, I think it depends on networks that you're talking about, for example. I mean, Al Jazeera clearly has a very strong presence in parts of the world, BBC, CNN.
Well, it's Al Jazeera as opposed to Al Jazeera America.
Right. And so it's going to depend on perhaps that particular company's focus, where they're going to be. I mean, you're going to have to search around to find a comprehensive coverage of international stories. You're not necessarily going to be able to find them in a single place. And oftentimes then, the story that is being told is not necessarily the whole story. And that's not necessarily the fault of the journalist. It's not necessarily the fault of the company. There's a limitation of resources. And so you have to cast about to find the whole story, the expertise, the insight, the analysis.
In terms of and talk for just a second, if you would, about your publications, the size and the nature of those.
Yeah, I represent Foreign Communications Company, which has newspapers, websites, obviously, and TV stations in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So we're upper Midwest, and it's dailies as well as weeklies. So we've got kind of a mix there, everything from your 50,000 circulation down to your 2,000 circulation. But yeah, it's that's all true. I mean, for us, it's not. We tend to be more concerned about giving people snacks of information a lot of times, rather than some of it's out of necessity, a space, like I said, some of it's just because there's a sense that that's what people want. They want a snack. They don't want the full meal always. If they want the full meal, they'll sit down and get it. Is that good? Not necessarily. It's not necessarily good. We tend to live in this world where we're probably more concerned some days about giving people what they want versus what they need. It's giving them the dessert instead of the vegetables sometimes.
And John, let me take you back to NBC for a second and the role there. I had the print bias for much of my career that, television's a headline service and print tells the news. Well, most people get their news from television, and I think that bias died out a while ago in terms of the recognition of where news flows. When you watch coverage today across the range of the networks, Is it all just horse race? Are we seeing analysis? Are we seeing the kinds of, there's a lot more data-driven stuff that comes on now in certain times of the election cycle. What are we seeing?
We're seeing Donald Trump.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
We're seeing Donald Trump all the time.
Yeah.
I tuned in last night to a particular cable news channel, and on a day when the United States and Russia seemed at each other's throats over Syria, probably the most important issue in the world right now, a newscast led with Donald Trump, who was holding a live speech in New Hampshire. There were double boxes, and you had Donald Trump in one box, and you had Jeb Bush in the other, and we heard 5 minutes of Donald Trump, and then we heard a panel talk about Donald Trump, and then we went back to Donald Trump for another 5 minutes, and I turned it off before they ever got to Jeb Bush. He called, Donald Trump talked about his tax plan. He called some of his opponents stupid, and got a lot of applause, but I'm not sure how enlightening that is. I always talk about cable news offering more heat than light. It seems to me that we're getting less light and a lot more heat when it comes to politics, and Donald Trump seems to have fanned the flames.
When we look at the kind of print coverage now, there was a time, there's a book I recommend you called Boys on the Bus of the 1968 presidential campaign, which really
Great book.
Great book. And first time we really had a peek inside the somewhat, at times, outrageous conduct, but nonetheless a true look at how campaigns were being covered. But there was a whole pool of people. It wasn't just a bus, it was several buses following some of the major candidates. And newspapers felt compelled to cover people start of campaign to the end. And in some ways, if you were a presidential candidate, the people who covered you all the way from New Hampshire and Iowa on suddenly became the White House correspondent. That was replicated in some degree at local and regional newspapers, where people had that kind of trail through. What's the state now in terms of how people get those jobs, if they even exist? The kind of political chunky job.
At least speaking for our group of newspapers, I mean, there are a couple of those jobs in our company covering
more wire servicey.
A little more wire servicey, working for a greater group of papers versus maybe for one organization. I think those are still out there, but even the focus of those jobs, is changing. Our political writer in the Twin Cities, for example, who used to cover, used to be really, really in deep with campaigns, everything that was going on. I mean, he's having to cover things from a wider scope now, with a wider lens, so to speak, because I guess our feeling is that people are not as engaged in some of those along the way details that have in the past been covered. And now, when we do those stories, of course, we follow the internet a little bit, and this is maybe a scary place to go, but when you look at those stories and how people click on them, and if are people paying attention, you find that they aren't. Now, should that drive the newspaper ship and how we cover things? I don't know, but it does. It does.
And everybody's watching metrics now.
They're watching metrics. Yep.
What's trending? I can't say this. Trending on Twitter. Sorry.
Yes.
Trending. But they're looking to make news judgments off of that.
Absolutely.
Not something I would. I mean, you used to ignore the phone calls that came to the newsroom. That's probably not the right way to do it either. But the world is now adopting American political tactics. Axelrod, I think, was an advisor in the last. Was it the British election?
Yes.
And the news coverage, is that becoming more like the American news coverage on a global basis?
I would argue that, and the two countries that I watch most closely when it comes to elections are Israel and the United Kingdom. And they have both had numerous consultants and campaign advisors flying from Washington or New York to those countries. And I think as you change the nature of campaigns, the nature of campaign coverage is going to have to change as well. So it's sometimes the constant coverage, it's the following the candidates, it's wherever the bus shows up, then the media has to be there. And it doesn't matter that their political systems are different. It doesn't matter that they're not electing a president. You're still going to follow the leader of the party, the potential prime minister.
It's true. I mean, I know a number of of former journalists turned consultants for foreign countries who've traveled around the world to help produce election nights. They may not understand the language. They often don't understand the language. They don't speak it. But it's not unusual for an American who's run a network news election operation to travel to, let's say, Lebanon and help that country produce their election coverage. So, I mean, yeah, in look, I think that that's part of it. In substance, you know, I don't know.
Well, let me ask all three of you, and then again, I'm going to encourage anyone who has a question, come on up to the mic, and we'll fold you into the conversation. Don't be bashful. Money involved later. No, there isn't. We could work that out for the first person. Do we know more about our candidates today through media or not? Or they seized control of their image? You know, you had to go through a columnist or a reporter. You made friends with Apple at Times or somebody at the LA. You know, you had to be on their radar screen. And I just don't know whether first of all, are we learning much about the candidates in the reporting, and are they as vital in terms of media as they once were?
I interviewed Gary Hart probably a few months ago about his new book.
Former presidential candidate.
Former presidential candidate who, for those of you who weren't around, was at the center of a big scam. A picture showed up, among other things, a picture showed up of him with a young woman that was not his wife on a boat called Monkey Business.
Monkey Business, yeah.
And
can't make this up.
There were questions about his relationships with women, and he challenged the news media, or at least some suggest that he challenged the news media to follow him around and prove it. And somebody did. He is, at this point, very resentful still of that. But he suggests that what happened was, after Watergate, that the world changed, and that most reporters engaged in gotcha journalism as a result of Watergate because they wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. I don't know whether that's true. I mean, we now do know a lot more about candidates for various reasons, because we have more information on the internet. Everything is taped. Everybody who got a phone can take every single second of where you are and what you say. So maybe we know more. I'm not sure we do, though. I'm not sure we know more about what they really think, because sometimes they're just afraid to reveal it, that they'll dig a hole for themselves.
More talking points, more rehearsed moments, if you will, and not the spontaneous. But what, again, your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we probably do know a lot more. We know a lot more about their hair choices and their wardrobe choices and their email preferences and, you know, all kinds of things that probably aren't.
I'm not
Exactly. No, that's my point. That's my point. Probably not more about the substance of the beliefs or values or policies that they represent, but all of the other stuff about, yeah, absolutely.
And I'm just old enough to remember Gary Hart and Monkey Business.
Right.
And that came to mind immediately when you asked the question. And it is something that has translated into other countries' campaigns as well. You have that microscope now, not focusing on candidates' policies, their defense policy, their fiscal policy. You can see that in Israeli campaigns. You can see it in British campaigns. Did Benjamin Netanyahu's wife spend too much on redecorating the apartment? Did David Cameron, what is his hair choice today? And for a while, all three of the major British political leaders, party leaders, had essentially the same hair. But that was, the image aspect was becoming more important than the message, and I think that reflected the changing nature of how campaigns were covered in those countries. And they have become, I would say, significantly less substantive since about 1990 to 95.
Well, you might take it back to 1960 and the Kennedy-Nixon debate. I mean, that's where you might really go, because for the first time, when Richard Nixon sweat, and when he looked made up, and he seemed to fumble, it damaged him. It appeared to damage him, and it appeared to change the course of that election, some would say. I mean, since television has been a force, since the image, how you look, how you sound, whether or not you're friendly, whether or not people like you, means more sometimes than what you say, the substance of what you say, and it is a sad commentary in some ways.
It's illustrative to go back to the campaign ads of the early 1950s when television was just coming really into fore, and watch Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson do an ad. I have to tell you, even though I was a child and watched a lot of campaigns since, it's painful because they're really trying to explain their policy on defense or spending, and it's words, and it's hard to watch in a world of 5-second or 10-second sound bites. But they were actually trying to be substantive. Or tweets. Let's turn it around. Candidates in response, seizing control of their image and circumventing the media. I mean, whether we're good or bad for politics, is that now becoming a little irrelevant?
I think they can try.
Okay.
But there's always that person who wants to break the next Gary Hart and monkey business story
The
to
47%
undermine
Romney video capturing the left.
that they undermine, if you will, the managed message that the candidates are attempting to put forward. And consequently, I suppose, candidates become even more managed, less spontaneous, and probably less issue-driven because they are so focused on trying to. And I'm speaking, I think, more from international campaigns, but also American, from what I can see.
I think if you take Hillary and Obama, both highly managed, both carefully managed. I mean, I was going to talk about this tonight. The Obama White House has been called the most secretive White House ever. And Hillary has been under huge pressure to spend more time with journalists because she hadn't had that many press conferences. They tried to manage her in a way, or she and her campaign together managed her in such a way that the less she said, the worse it seemed to get for her, despite the fact that she tried to manage her image. So sometimes it works very well, and sometimes you can go directly to the voter. I'll just give you one more example. In the 90s, before all of the technology, Bill Clinton went around the National Press Corps and went to local markets where he could get live town meetings and get all this free TV time in major markets in America, and his people felt that he'd have easier questions from those programs than he would if he did a national debate. That became a popular way for a presidential candidate at the time to avoid the national media. Now, things have changed, and it's not so easy to do that.
Question there.
Yeah, my question is about CNN. Is clearly, I think, a network that you've been referencing during this conversation. And
I haven't said CNN.
I know you haven't said it, but I think that's what it is. Clearly, they focused on, driving content based on ratings. You saw that especially with like the Malaysian Airlines disaster. So how does that become fixed? There's Trump is leading all the newscasts, but is Trump where the electorate should be focusing on? So how do these networks fix that problem? Is it a leadership issue? Is it the viewers just want that, and the viewers need to, I don't know. I guess, what is the answer to that? I mean, Al Jazeera clearly is not focusing on it.
Well, look, honestly, Donald Trump, as I've said, is a phenomenon. He is someone that people seem to be interested in. He says some outrageous things. He says, I think, some pretty ugly things from time to time. He said some ugly things about some female journalists, some male journalists. He gets attention. Eventually, he's going to have to come up with some specifics. His tax plan lately has been one of the issues that he's taken on, and it appears that he's going to deliver some specifics on that. But, you know, I'm not sure that for the American people it's going to be enough. I mean, he says he's leading the polls, great, but I'm not sure when we get down to it, I mean, by the way, it's more than a year until this election, that the American people are going to be satisfied with, well, I'm great, I'm the greatest, I'm terrific, I can do this. I promise you, I'm the best. That may not be enough. We'll see. It's really early. It was a slow August for news. It's quiet. He had a real opportunity to play to a news media that was hungry, and he got some attention.
I'll say, I don't know that it can be fixed. I think that's just the world changes, media changes, everything changes, and you have to, I mean, you keep moving along with it. I'm not sure you can go back, or at any point in time we've been able to go back and make it what it was. I think we just have to figure out how to navigate in this world today and still, you know, give people both of those things.
Maybe we shouldn't go back too. I mean, there are a lot of things the news media did in the good old days that wasn't so good.
Palsy-walsy kind of coverage. A lot of people would adopt a candidate so they could propel themselves up. I'm not spilling any secrets, I don't think. Next question.
Yeah, my next question is, within the next few years, Politico announced the other day that they're going to have about 50 State House reporters now, every state capital in the United States. In today's digitally connected 24/7 news cycle, world, do you believe that State House reporters are still needed? In recent years, newspapers especially have cut down on their State House reporting. Do you guys think they're still needed?
Yes, it is. I definitely do still believe that. Like I said before, I think how they cover the news might be different or might change, but I think they're still absolutely relevant. But that's why in our world it tends to be more reporters that are working on behalf of the masses versus maybe for one organization. A lot of when I take Minnesota, a lot of people have stopped having full-time Capitol reporters there. Our North Dakota Capitol, it's sad actually. You walk into it and it's a place that used to have people sitting at all of the cubicles, and now there's maybe 2 reporters in there, and one of them is our company. But it's we still believe in that, though, absolutely, that there needs to be eyes and ears where those decisions are being made.
Certainly, as a consumer of news, I mean, as I try to watch what's going on within the state and local arenas, I mean, I depend on somebody having a reporter and peer. I depend a lot on public broadcasting because of the cuts in the commercial media in South Dakota. And oftentimes, whether it's the Argus Leader or one of the television stations, they'll have a single reporter dedicated to state politics or even local politics, which means, and I've seen this occur a time or two within the Sioux Falls area, that if that person's on vacation, there's no coverage. I mean, that baffles me. But I think as a consumer, I would want to see that, because maybe then it will propel other organizations to take their coverage up a level, or maybe in fact they'll have to follow the coverage that somebody else is providing. And at this point, I speak primarily as a consumer, but then as a political scientist, you want, the information has to get out there. And you don't want to depend on a political party or a government website. You want somebody there to offer the more objective view. So, I mean, I certainly hope that they are able to do that, and I hope, other media companies follow.
In my opinion, it's a tragedy that what's happened at state legislatures across the country. And you would describe exactly the sort of Capitol Hill newsrooms that I grew up and got my chops working in Tennessee at the state capitol. There was a huge press corps that followed the sessions, and they kept track of the lobbyists, and they watched who was donating money to lawmakers, and they followed particular bills that mattered to the people of Tennessee, not just the outrageous ones that seem to rise up in the press on the front pages today. But it's true not only about the House, about the State House, but it's also true about the courts. I mean, if you look, it's not just the Supreme Court. Probably each state Supreme Court is having a bigger impact on the people of every state than the U.S. Supreme Court. They're the places where the laws are being changed or made or explained, and it's an absolute tragedy that court reporters have disappeared from the landscape. You can count the number of reporters in this country that cover the courts on one hand. Yeah. It's tragic, and I hope eventually that we'll get back to a point where we can put reporters in the courts, because it takes time. If you've got to sit through a case, it's complicated. You've got to understand the law, and you've got to help translate it to people and explain to them why this matters to them. It's not being done now. It was many years ago.
I covered the Indiana legislature in the mid-1970s. During session, there would be 28 reporters, print reporters. I worked for a 23,000 circulation daily and covered the legislature through its entire term. I mean, that just couldn't possibly occur today. There's not the staff, not the funds. And I was responsible for probably 16 legislators, senators and the local districts. And I had to write something every day to justify being there, but I covered them. They didn't introduce a bill, a resolution, vote one way or the other, and I didn't send a tally. And that's not happening. And the data reporting is one thing, but I think you were alluding, there's the explanation of the data. And that's what's eluding us now.
That's when the good old days were good.
Well, and I think
more or less, yeah. Salaries were still low.
It raises the issue of accessibility for government, too.
Yes.
It's one thing to have a reporter on the spot in order to understand, the mechanisms, the legislation, how the coalitions are coming together. We depend, and I get a lot of my information on South Dakota politics, for example, now from a couple of bloggers. But the bloggers aren't there. Essentially, they're commenting on the feed, right? And
on TV, right?
Yep. And
or
so,
online.
or just somebody else's reports.
So they're coming up, they're reading your newspaper to come up with,
And so they're not really helping accessibility to government. And, it's not necessarily coverage in the type that helps make voters more informed.
My question is a little more local. You guys were talking earlier about how national news is available in a lot of different places. So do you have any advice for us as college journalists to localize some of those issues and topics, and or how to get college students to care about them?
The question of the hour. What do you think?
Well, you probably answered your own question in a sense. Getting college students to care about them is finding that thing in there that relates back to their lives, which is, of course, the basis of localization. But I think it's a matter of looking at every story you see on a national level with those eyes. And it's great. You guys are the students. You run the student newspaper. You're in a great position to be able to ask yourselves, why would this matter to me? Does this interest me? Is there something in here that people like me should know about? And that's a great thing about where you guys are at. And I think maybe even the disadvantage that a newspaper where I work, for example, is we're not as connected to that group as you are. So, but it's how you're looking at the news and making sure you see yourself in that equation.
Right on target. I agree.
I think so much of it relates to impact. How does it affect us personally? And it doesn't have to be monetary. Sometimes it's that visceral reaction. And goes back to the old CNN effect, which was the term that was used oftentimes during the course of Rwanda or Somalia, that there's something about a story that makes us feel something and then propels us to pay more attention and eventually then having to turn that attention into action. And that's that's the struggle, is how do you make that connection? And I mean, it's not something that's limited to journalists. Professors face the same problem. How do we make what we are talking about impact you so that you want to learn, you want to do?
It's like that picture of the baby that washed up sadly on the shore, the refugee. I mean, this story has been going on for years. Yeah. Refugees have been streaming out of Syria and Iraq for years, out of Africa, out of Libya. But for some reason, it took years to pay attention. Only when this picture of that child showed up in newspapers around the world did some people begin to pay attention, which is tragic. I just go back to the local thing and the ultra-local thing. It's happening in television, too, as well, cable television. And again, back where I live in the Connecticut area and the New York area, there are what they call sort of ultra-local cable channels on cable systems, like Cablevision. And for our community, it's a must-watch. I feel like if I read the local paper and I watch Channel 12, I know about what's going on in my local community, and I wouldn't have a cable system that didn't have. I would rather have that than than almost the national cable.
John, are they showing on Channel 12 the meeting?
They show local meetings. They have people who've covered local politics. They cover the election. They do debates. They talk about issues like. Also sorts of health care issues. I mean, they're things that affect the community, and they talk about the schools, you know, and if you're a parent in one of those communities, you care about the schools and you want to know what's going on. So I think that's a possible model in the future for television that may not have, that some communities haven't seen yet.
Okay, thank you. Question?
So you guys have talked a lot about this upcoming election with the presidential election and how we're getting this flood information that we don't really need necessarily. And so I guess my question is, and some of these candidates have really used that to propel their campaigns and to get into the spotlight more than others. And so I guess looking forward to the future, do journalists need to be more aggressive and go back to the basics, or do we continue just to go into this trend of it's what the people want, the metrics are there showing us this? I mean, where do we go, you know, between the scale of things?
Well, you know, I'm a little torn because I tend to believe we have to just keep propelling that forward, and at the end of the day, I don't know if it's okay to say this is wrong, but I mean, these newspapers and TV stations, it's a business. There's more to it than that, obviously, the journalism, but we have to find ways to live in both of those worlds where we're pursuing the journalism, we're doing everything we can, but recognizing at the end of the day that we're doing it not for ourselves, we're doing it for the readers, we're doing it for those people. And so, you know, the question is that really what they want, or is that just what we think they want? I don't know, but I don't think there's any going back.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. No going back. No going back? John, you.
I think it's going to be hard to go back. I really do in lots of ways. You know, like so many things, when you talk about technology, it's hard to go back. When you start talking about, well, I'd like to see it the way it once was. We've moved to a new level, and you know, maybe we can hopefully try to figure out how we can infuse the old values into a new system. You know.
From a political science standpoint, you know, we started out with the sort of Village Green conversation, and there was a journal of opinion in the most communities when this country started. We've moved into mass media, and then of course technology, and I can't remember the last time I didn't learn about something from this before I learned about it any other way. But the dynamic now for a voter, and for somebody looking to make a decision about, you know, should I elect somebody who's going to pave the streets but raise my tax? If you can talk about this for a second, the dynamic there that is the principal fulcrum. What really changes the mind
Well, I think
It's sort of implicit in that.
yeah, if we look at, I mean, the American electorate, you have to wonder really how many people are willing to have their mind changed. As we look at the division, that we know even within independents, only a minority of them are truly independent, that most people have their minds made up before the campaign even starts. And so the question becomes, at least when you're campaigning and looking at elections, not how do you reach out to a wide audience, it's how do you focus on a very small group. And you may not actually start focusing on them. They may not start paying attention until this time next year.
Yeah.
In which case, everything that occurs between now and the end of next September is noise.
There are clearly strategies for that in campaigns that are using technology to drill down on the people that they want, that they need to get to make those decisions on those people who are undecided. I would say that. At the same time, this country is spending, these candidates are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy TV time.
Right.
Mostly to buy TV time on local television channels all over America. That's old media, that's broad, that's not, zeroing in on an email or a zip code, but these are broad-based buys, and I don't think that people would be giving their hard-earned money to campaigns if they didn't believe that it made a difference. That negative ads swayed voters and pushed them in one direction or the other in a tight race, in a tough campaign. So while you're absolutely right that the technology allows campaigns to get down to the minute, to the block or the individual house, we're still in a system where television is the way to reach voters, and and you're the guy that knows this research. I don't know what impact that really has, except for the fact that, I'm sure there's been research done on it. What do you think?
Well, and that gets slightly beyond my, we need Professor Smith here who does campaigns and elections. But what we do seem to know is that a good deal of the spending and the PAC money ultimately has very little effect on the outcomes.
That's what I suspect.
Yeah. And that it really is just noise.
That's a whole lot of noise. That's billions of dollars worth of noise.
And really, in some of the more recent elections, you're focusing on 10 to 20% of the voting electorate. And you're not going to reach them necessarily through, not the mailings, and I'm getting beyond my expertise here, so I'm hesitant to go too far out. But
go ahead.
I do it in the classroom, but the question is how, and I'm sure that they're spending millions of dollars now in each of the major campaigns to figure out how do we get to that small percentage of people that will ultimately make a difference when they get to the voting booth. And they'll be doing all sorts of polls, they'll be targeting campaigning. And I don't know how they do that. I know that they don't do it through the television advertisements that they're using. They're not going to do it through most of what we're watching now.
Mm-hmm. Madam Editor?
Yes.
Let me spin this a little bit. So there are these groups that are set to some degree and that are hearing a lot of noise. They represent readers and advertising targets. Mm-hmm. There's the smaller subset, whatever size it is, of people who are really sitting there going, I don't know. We're tracking more and more coverage and focus and prominence of display through metrics. Mm-hmm. That's those blocks. Now, with somewhat different results, Fox and MSNBC have made their decisions. They're going to pitch to those audiences. In print, is there a Fox MSNBC decision being made in newsrooms? Who's the target? Is it the eyeballs or the brains? Maybe if I can do that.
It's eyeballs or brains.
It's a tough moment.
it's, I think
Because it is a business.
It is a business, of course it is, but I think in the newsrooms, I don't think those things are playing out, and at least in newsrooms and on our level, on my level, that those kinds of conversations take place. I think they're thinking about the readers, the eyeballs, but they're thinking more about those undecided. Probably they're talking about those people who are. That group in the middle. No, I mean that we always, people accuse the media of being, conspiring this side or that side.
Yeah.
And
there's a single meeting in New York that filters out every morning on how the coverage is done.
If we only had that much time.
John actually sends out the note.
Yeah, if only we had that much time to sit around and do that, right?
Okay. Well, but,
my question kind of goes with Trent's. We talked about how the national news organizations kind of ask questions in interviews and in the debates kind of to pin the candidates almost against each other and not necessarily getting substance out of their policies. And then as the younger generation comes up, we're constantly told to vote, and it becomes a little discouraging when the main source of news comes from national organizations. I'm wondering if it'll end up that most people won't vote, and then the people that do will vote off of the substanceless image information from the national organizations, or if the national organizations will spin into like a media ratings kind of race, or will they fade out?
I think if you're talking about which comes first, the content or the spin, for most people?
There was something at the beginning of your question that I had something pop into my mind, and no candidate is going to win a vote by agreeing with his or her opponent. They may win a vote for that opponent. And so they have to ensure that there are differences, no matter how small, that there are differences, and that those are magnified so that it looks like there is only one clear choice to be made. And consequently then, I mean, you look at a campaign and coverage as essentially, I don't know, a magnifying glass, I guess, that has to blow every, perhaps minute and minor difference or misstep, going back to some of the earlier topics, into something major in order to separate yourself from the rest of the pack. And you don't have time to explain the policy differences when you're working with a 20 to 30 second story.
I agree entirely. I just want to go back to the people who are asking the questions. I want to say that the folks at Fox who asked those questions in the first debate, and Jake Tapper, who on CNN handled, and Dana Bash, I thought both Fox and CNN did a terrific job of asking questions. The problem, in my opinion, is the format is so outrageous. I mean, how can 16 or 17 people be on stage and actually get into any depth on anything? It's just impossible. It's not possible to do that. And I think somehow the candidates and these TV organizations ought to get together and figure out how we can have more substantive discussions about the issues, as opposed to throwing one-liners between, the Carly Fiorina and Donald Trump throwing one-liners at each other. That doesn't seem to me to raise the level of conversation at all.
Very good. Well, with a few minutes left, we'll go to the sort of the lightning round. So a quick question, and if you want to direct that to one particular panel member or two, feel free to do that.
I was just kind of wondering what you guys thought the relationship between journalism and politics are going to be going in the future, and where you think that will be going.
Well, a broad question.
I'm going to do a speech about it tonight.
Yeah, there we go. So 6 o'clock here in this room. No, 5 o'clock reception. But
and this is from my international perspective, and I've spent a lot of time in the developing world. And there were always a couple of things when I started traveling that were ubiquitous. Coca-Cola and satellite dishes. And now satellite dishes are still there, but now we see smartphones. And one of the things that will remain a constant is that new technologies will continue to evolve that people want to seize upon in order to remain connected remain informed, and to tell their story. And I think that's been part of the democratization of media and journalism, is that we can expect more and more of that. We don't have just the Murrow boys telling us the news anymore. We have a blogger on the streets of Cairo. We have somebody tweeting from Bahrain. So you're going to see, the continued evolution of various types of media technology. And it's going to be a constant struggle. Whatever becomes available to the people, the governments will attempt to respond with in kind. And so, I think it's, to some extent, and people who take my classes know that I rarely refrain from making predictions, no matter how badly they could go. But one of the predictions that I feel safe in making is that while we don't know where we're going to be in 10 years, we know that we're going to be someplace else.
Yeah.
And there is going to be, a continued drive forward, or however you want to describe it.
Okay.
Anybody who tells you that they know what's going to happen in media and in journalism in the next 5 years, I think they're lying or just making it up. Because when I got into television news in the 80s, people were talking about the end of the evening newscast. It was over. Right. There were dinosaurs. It's over. The news anchors, they're done. I mean, that was 30 years ago. Well, television's alive and well. Network news is alive and well. Now we've got cable and we've got the internet. I don't think we know how it's going to turn out.
All right. And the final question.
So, if you remember what you said 45 minutes ago, John.
I have no idea.
Playback. No.
You said how media has become a got you media.
Right.
Do you think that that's a reflection of the political environment that we have, where candidates are making personal shots at each other, whether or not that's on their public policy points or just advertisements they run or whatever? Do you think that media's almost kind of become a reflection in that sense of what's happening in the political process?
I don't see as much gotcha nowadays as I see, and there's going to be plenty of it, I think, in this election cycle. But right now, I see kind of outrageous comments in order to get attention, and which is a little bit of a new thing, especially in a presidential race where you expect a little more, some might say, dignified behavior. This seems to be kind of a raucous version of WWE. I'm stunned at some of what I'm seeing. Most of the journalists I know who covered political campaigns for many years, who've been to the convention, their mouths are dropping open. They've never quite seen anything like this before. And I don't think it's just due to Donald Trump. Look, there are a lot of candidates in this race with lots of different ideas and different opinions. We hit kind of a new patch in, I think, in politics today. And just like we don't know where journalism is headed, I'm not sure we know where this political election cycle and system is headed. It's different. And I think all of us are sort of anxious to cover it this year because we've never quite seen anything like it before.
We're looking a lot more like Italian and Israeli politics right now, where you have an incredible number of political parties and certainly in Israel personalities, and you have to separate yourself from the pack. And however you need to do it, you do it, because bland don't cut it.
Gotcha on the regional and local level? Is that as strong a trend as we might see internationally or nationally?
I probably not. I don't know. I mean, it's there.
Or is it more in local circumstance, not a trend?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's more a local circumstance. I don't see a ton of that. I don't know. I may not be understanding the question right, but I don't see a ton of that playing on a local, regional. I mean, it's there, but it's not. I don't think it's a trend.
Oh, very good.
Thank you.
If you'll join me in thanking our panel members. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Who do you owe the money to.
That's right, yeah, that's right. At 5 o'clock, there'll be a reception in the concourse area. At 6 o'clock, the presentation of the 2015 Al Neuharth Award for Excellence in Media. So we hope you'll join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.